Hello, are you new to Final Fantasy XIV's PvP? Were you unfortunate enough to have chosen Season 12 as your entry point to ranked CC? Are you feeling your self-worth plummet with every LB you eat in Frontlines? Worry not. While Final Fantasy XIV's PvP can be really hard to get into, there's a lot you can do to make your PvP introduction a bit less of a bitter drought. My name is Talke, I'm a PvP nerd, and these are my top 5 universal tips for novice PvP players. Keep in mind that these tips assume that you're newish but not completely fresh to PvP, and that you already understand certain basic PvP mechanics such as battle height, soaring, or overtime. With that out of the way, tip number 1. Let's talk about customizing your screen to suit your needs. There's no way around this one. The default heads-up display, aka HUD, sucks. And there's actually a lot the game doesn't tell you right out of the box about how much you can personalize your display without mods. First, let's explore the HUD itself. Having certain information in a visible place is important in any type of combat content in 14, but being the most fast-paced content on offer, it's especially important that you place certain elements where your eyes can see them. So, let's go over them. By default, your target info element comes with everything you should need to know about your target, their hit points, whatever they're casting, and any buffs or debuffs on them. However, the game allows you to further split those elements, allowing you to place them wherever you feel you need them. Your parameter bar contains your HP and MP bars. Make sure to place them where you can see them. And now for each mode's exclusive elements. Let's start with Crystalline Conflict. First, the CC map. By default, it's up, to the right, and tiny. Since it helps you discern where your teammates and enemies are, move it to a convenient place and size. The same goes for the CC battle log, where you'll not only see a kill feed, but also a countdown for map mechanics. And the CC progress gauge, where you see payload progress for both teams on either side of the bar, as well as a match timer. The CC enemy info and ally info blocks are, as you'd expect, the party lists for both sides. Frontline shares more elements with the regular PvE HUD, so the only two unique elements for it are score info, which by default is on top of your screen, and your battle height gauge. The scoreboard in particular gives you information about which grand company is the team to beat, so make sure it's visible to you. Finally, rival wings. This HUD has some elements which might be familiar to you from Alliance raids. The rival wing station info element usually displays a timer until a train with the resources comes into the middle station, and occupation numbers once that train arrives. The rival wings alliance list shows all other 5 light parties comprising your alliance. You'll notice that it has a little flexing man icon, which shows how many soaring stacks a team has, as well as their ceruleum count. The rival wings team info element will show your light party's ceruleum count, machina available or in use, and the rest of the alliance's machina occupation and ceruleum count as well. The rival wings mercenary info displays a timer until the mercenary, a particularly strong minion players can use during a push, is targetable, and on which end of the map you may find him. Finally, the rival wings gauges displays information such as tower health, core health, and the match timer. Now let's talk about your keybinds or your crossbars. If you use keyboard and mouse as your control scheme, you can change your default keybinds from settings, keybinds. The 3 tabs that are of most interest to you would be movement, targeting, and hotbar. While a large number of default keybinds are made with MMO player habits in mind, remember that ultimately they're meant to be used by you. Change them to buttons that make sense to you. Place your buttons where they're clearly visible to you. If you use crossbars, Revival mentor Obito Tiny Chocobo says that one of the best things that you can do is having double crossbars, which you can use by double tapping each side's triggers on your controller. This way, you have visibility and access to all of your buttons with little difficulty. You can also dip into expanded controls if it gives you extra buttons. And on the note of controllers, let's go on to tip number 2. Figure out a targeting scheme that works for you. Learning how to target properly in each mode is likely to be your first hurdle, especially on the large-scale PvP modes, Frontline and Rival Wings. First things first, do you use keyboard or controller? Let's go over controller first because they're potentially the ones that need the most customization. Controller users need a fair bit more practice and fiddling due to how targeting is done with them. In Crystalline Conflict, closest enemy targeting and name targeting are your friends, but in Rival Wings and Frontline, your targeting is fully dependent on your visual field, since there's only a limited number of macros that can help you define a target. Revival mentor Avatar Korra suggests to mess with menu, character config, control settings, target tab, and from then auto-target settings, target type, and ground targeting settings until they feel good to you. The next step over, the filters, allows you to restrict what you will target based on filters applied, as well as what you can cycle through via D-pad or shoulder plus D-pad tab targeting. Also, practice tilting the camera left-right to assist with targeting by removing some players from the screen, as the targeting options only select from what's visible. Practice using an isometric style POV when charging against a large group so you can more easily judge depth, as looking head-on will make it very difficult to target effectively on controller. Finally, you can create targeting macros that conform to the current markers used, such as the ones on screen right now. This will automatically target people marked with those. Keyboard and mouse users have decidedly more freedom in their targeting scheme of choice. In Crystalline Conflict, you can choose between normal tab targeting, clicking on nameplates on party lists, clicking on the character on your screen, and even setting up enemy target macros if that's more comfortable. In Rival Wings and Frontline, it's often faster to either tab onto the person closest to you, or simply use your mouse cursor to click on them. I personally operate on a mix of proximity targeting when there isn't a priority target, and enemy list clicking when there is. As a keyboard and mouse user, I've set up some examples of how targeting looks like in a Crystalline Conflict match that you can check out on the following clips. My cursor will be visible on these clips so you can see where I'm placing it. This is an example of proximity targeting and cycling. You can see that I'm just targeting whomever is closest and then tabbing on to the next person that's closest. On this next example, you can see I'm physically placing my cursor on top of the character that I want to target. This is not very efficient, but it works on Frontlines and Rival Wings. Finally, we have the type of targeting where you place your cursor on top of the party list of the person that you want to target. This is particularly good for when you have a specific target, such as someone your party has called out. For Crystalline Conflict in particular, there's enemy-specific targeting macros that are very useful to quickly go to your chosen target. You can see the syntax on screen now. And now let's go on to tip number 3. Understanding what other jobs do is critical to knowing how to engage with and against them. If you're new to PvP, it generally is best to start by focusing on only one job. However, you'll find that in general, the more knowledgeable a player is, the better at engaging and surviving they are. Things like what certain cooldowns do, how long do they last, which attacks go through guard or break it. These kind of things make it easier for you to read what's going on and how to use your own resources accordingly. I personally find it pretty fun to play all of them, even if I consider one or two jobs my actual mains. But if you don't like a job or specific role enough to take it on in a game, it's as simple as reading the tooltips on the official guide or hitting a dummy in the wolf's den to figure out what they look and sound like, as well as how much damage they do. And on that note, learning when to fight and when to withdraw is an important skill to develop in this mode. While guard and purify are critical skills and knowing how not to waste them is important, your MP bar is basically your second HP bar, and it matters just as much. Without counting MP recovered by natural regen, you essentially have 4 charges of recuperate. Learning how to use those to stay in the fight and survive withdrawing to safety will likely be one of the most critical survival skills you can learn as a PvP player. A lot of new players fear dragging their team down through not doing enough damage or getting enough kills. But if there is one thing PvP in 14 punishes heavily, it's not low damage or no kills. It's dying repeatedly. Rival Wings buffs your enemy's party with every death. Frontline halves your battle high whenever you die. And in Crystalline Conflict, your respawn timer extends by 1 second every time you're knocked down, then 3 in overtime. Making an effort to learn how to balance surviving, taking damage without dying, pressuring the enemy, and carrying out your objectives is incredibly important in all 3 modes. Let me put this in no uncertain terms. To other CC players, this qualifies as a felony. There's things your teammates can do to help you survive and get in and out of an engagement, but in 14 PvP, you're the only one in charge of your survival. Learning to have a good read of the situation is the type of game sense that comes with experience, experimentation, and a lot of matches won and lost. Depending on the mode, this decision will look different due to the size of maps and differing objectives, but it often comes down to 2 very important factors in common: positioning and resources. Some exceptions notwithstanding, there's almost no advantageous or strategic depth in any of the PvP modes. Your chances of bouncing back drastically improve the better you are at lowering the D in your KDA. And with that said, let me blow your mind with the last tip. This will sound counterintuitive considering how many of the tips in this list are oriented towards teaching you how to survive in Final Fantasy XIV's PvP. However, this is more of a piece of advice meant for your mental stability as you learn more and more about this game mode. In Final Fantasy XIV PvP, you're going to die. A lot. Like, a lot. And that's fine, so long as you try to understand why. One of the paradoxical things about PvP in this game is that when you get into the reeds of it, it is in essence the type of Final Fantasy XIV content with the longest and steepest learning curve. Your content isn't a boss with a set rotation and only a limited number of variations within its mechanics. And your goal isn't a large damage number at the end of each game. Your content is anywhere from 9 to 71 other players whose actions you cannot really control or account for. And your goal is achieving objectives for which at least half, if not more, of those players are happy to conk you out. The reason why this is my last tip to you is because a lot of new PvP players equate death with failure, when in fact it's a natural step of the learning process. At the start of your practice as a PvP player of this game, expecting yourself to perform flawlessly is both unrealistic and harmful. There will be a lot of players who will knowledge check you hard, and it's going to result in badly lost matches and embarrassing defeats. Don't let it get to you. Try to understand why it happened. If you can't make sense of it, reach out to people in your server's wolf's den or ask if there's any PvP mentors in your local novice network. I guarantee there's almost always someone willing to explain something that made no sense to you, or put you in touch with someone willing to teach. The grand majority of the PvP community for this game is very welcoming and enthusiastic to players interested in learning and improving. Well, these have been my top 5 general tips for newcomers to Final Fantasy XIV's PvP. I feel they each went considerably in depth, but if there was something that wasn't clear or didn't make sense to you, please reach out to me on the comments and I will be happy to explain. If you have found this video to be useful, I would very much appreciate a like, a comment, or a subscription. If you have any PvP topics you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments and I'll see what I can do.